Card rarities no longer feel special in Clash Royale. The rare cards don't feel special, epic cards don't feel epic, and even legendary cards, which brought extreme joy to many players and were essential in almost every deck back in 2016, are no longer unique. Speaking of legendaries, these cards were meant to have special interactions and abilities that other card rarities just couldn't replicate. They were incredibly rare, so rare that players would jump for absolute joy, unable to describe their excitement with words. Just from these clips, you can see it's not like today, and it's not any better for other rarities. So what made these cards so special? Why were they adored so much in the past? And why do current players, especially older players, think that most of them are useless? To understand what happened, we need to journey back to the past to uncover the story behind the rise and fall of card rarities in Clash Royale. So, let's rewind to 2016. It's been a few months since Clash Royale was released, a time when Supercell truly cared about community feedback, not just, profits. So, fun fact, before the global launch, legendary cards were not a thing. The game's cards were categorized into 3 types: commons, rares, and epics. Each type lived up to its name. 42 cards were present during this time, with 14 common cards, 14 rare cards, and 14 epic. Common cards were basic cards with simple abilities: swords, barbarians, knights, goblins, skeletons, arrows, buildings, air troops, etc. Rare cards were a bit more scarce, more expensive, and stronger than most common cards, and epics were, well, epic, powerful, and big troops that were harder to counter and more deadly to your towers. As Seth put it so eloquently, commons were the most basic cards and epics were more complex. Simple as that. But he also mentioned that rarity can often be based on how cool a card is, and not its complexity. Which is acceptable, I guess, but it becomes a problem when leveling up later on. Aside from those 2 factors, another factor was, and still kind of is, their drop rates from chests. Commons were easier to get than rares or epics. Back then, there were no big chests, no pass royale, no quests, no challenges, no clan wars, and no magical items. You could only get cards from the chests you earned or bought, and that's how you upgraded them. As expected, commons were common, and rares and epics were, well, more rare. Clash Royale was another simple and fun mobile game at that time. Then, a month after the game's release, on February 29th, Clash Royale launched globally, and a new rarity was added to spice things up. They added Legendaries. At first, only 2 legendary cards appeared, Princess and Ice Wizard, and I gotta say, people who got them were considered OP and better than every other player. They were in every deck of whoever had them. So why were they the best though? Well, it's because at that time, legendaries, if upgraded to max level, which was 6, were stronger than any other rarity. Not to confuse you with level scalings, legendary cards were 1 level higher than any epic card. With this scaling, they were made the most powerful cards in the game, so getting them was every player's dream. Legendaries truly deserved their status. They were unique and powerful, but obtaining them was no easy feat. Back then, the only reliable way to get a legendary card was from a super magical chest, which cost a whopping 46,000 gems, nearly $41 worth of gems for a single chest. There weren't as many powerful and great chests back then as there are today, but the chances of getting a single legendary card were not guaranteed. The odds of pulling one from a super magical chest were 1 in 500. To show you just how difficult this was, let's do some quick math. Don't worry, it's not gonna take long, I promise. Several factors determined how rare it was to get a legendary card: the number of cards in the chest, which changed depending on the arena, the number of legendaries in the game, the number of commons in the game, and a legendary factor. All of these factors were combined into a single formula, which was number of cards in the chest times number of legendaries in the game over number of commons in the game over legendary factor. Of course, this changed after the game introduced more arenas, cards, and legendaries, but let's figure out what the chances were at global launch. So at the time, there were 2 legendaries, 15 common cards, 7 arenas, and in the highest arena, the chest gave around 522 cards. The legendary factor was 600. Plugging these numbers into the formula, we get approximately a 12.8% chance to get a single legendary from a super magical chest. If you were lucky enough to unlock one, hey, congrats! Now it's time to max it out, but that's where another big problem arose. The number one problem was that you needed 86 cards to max out a legendary at that time, compared to today's 42. The second problem, well, remember when I said there were no quests, no magical items, no Clash Royale, and, well, all that? Yeah, you needed to get all 86 cards at one time. And to add salt to the wound, it wasn't always guaranteed. You'd have to spend your entire paycheck, and sometimes even more, to max out your princess. The average cost to get a single legendary from the super magical chest was around 260 bucks. That's a hefty sum to spend on the game. Plus, you'd be cycling between the princess and the ice wizard, making it even more difficult to max out the one you want. You could spend about $20,000, and that still wouldn't be enough. But before we continue, look at this picture. Yeah, that was possible, and it was hella rare. Chances of it may be around 1 in 1,500, and many people were lucky enough to get those. Imagine the surprised faces as players unboxed a free wooden chest and suddenly got a legendary, and those were the days. Getting legendaries was also possible from other chests, but it was uncommon and rare. If you think the game is pay to win now, just imagine how insane it was back then. What could we do? In May, Supercell removed the max level of legendaries, and players who had maxed them out were refunded with huge amounts of gems. But man, I don't know about you, but spending thousands of dollars to max out a single legendary and then getting just some gems in return, that's not acceptable and nowhere near satisfying. Supercell made it a bit easier to obtain legendaries by adding grand challenges in 2016. A 12-win chest gave a 27.5% chance of getting a legendary. While grand challenges were difficult, they were the cheapest way to unlock legendaries. Some people obtained them this way, but still a lot of money needed to be spent. Anyway, they were strong, but because upgrading them was not easy, as we mentioned, it wasn't game-breaking, unlike the other cards we'll talk about now. Some broke the game, and some just broke the card rarity hierarchy. First off, the Royal Giant, which was added in the same month as the first two legendaries, and Royal Giant wasn't weak. Oh no. It was strong, stronger than a regular giant, and today is still considered somewhat decent. But guess what? Giant is a rare card, while the Royal Giant is common, which just doesn't make sense. And we can't forget about Elite Barbarians. They were literally the fastest troop in the game at the time, and they were a common card instead of rare. That was in 2016, but hey, it still happens today. Take the Firecracker, for example, a powerful troop that remains strong even after 2020. And she's a common card as well, which doesn't make sense at all. A comment was left on our Firecracker video actually talking about this. Quote, I'm glad someone finally discussed how the Firecracker shouldn't be a common. You're telling me the Musketeer, whose gimmick is only range damage, is a rare, but the AoE, unique splash, recoil, insane rage, log surviving Firecracker is a common? Yeah, okay man. No other common card has her features and stats, and you'd expect her to be a legendary card because of her unique abilities, but nope, she's a common card. It just doesn't make sense. When the Night Witch was added, she didn't have any unique features like every other legendary card, but she was still a legendary, breaking the uniqueness rules. She was like the regular witch who spawned bats instead of skeletons. Her unique feature was that her death would spawn 4 bats, but that feature was later removed. Her unique feature was removed. I mean, she still spawns 1 bat, so I guess that's something. I'll mention one more. And this is about the Heal Spirit and every other spirit. The Heal Spirit today is trash compared to the other spirits, but it's a rare card, while the others are common. I feel like it kind of should be the other way around, but okay. There's also other cards too that aren't legendary but should be legendary today because of their unique features. But I guess Supercell just kind of does whatever they feel like doing. Okay, I'm done with my rant. Returning to our legendaries, a few months passed and 7 other legendary cards were added to the game. Around this time, Supercell realized it was still really difficult to get a legendary card. They saw posts and comments from people who had no hope of getting a single legendary card. Not everyone was a top player who could get a legendary card from grand challenges. So in September of that same year, they introduced 2 new chests, the Epic Chest and the Legendary Chest. Yeah, a legendary chest that had a single guaranteed legendary for just 500 gems, and it also had a rare chance of appearing as a reward from winning a match. They made it a bit easier for everyone to get one, but maxing out a legendary was still difficult because now there were 9 legendary cards and even more common cards plus more arenas, so it was simpler but still kind of hard. But hey, at least they gave everyone a chance to get at least one. And from the super magical chance, the chance to get a single legendary increased from 12.8% to 57%. The cost to max out one or all of them was also decreased due to this, but it was still a heck of a lot. Even more than an average doctor's monthly salary today by thousands. While adding the legendary chest was magical for players back then, today it's kind of laughable. You can get legendaries much easier and cheaper now from almost anywhere. From the global launch, legendary cards gained a lot of fame, but like other cards, some were great and some were, well, just plain bad. The community favorite back then was the Princess, with around 51% usage rate, and the Ice Wizard, managing to climb to a solid 30% by the end of March. Despite the Princess's HP nerf, she was the most popular troop in the game, and remained that way for a long time. Around April to May, her usage rate even peaked at 65% due to her bigger range and splash damage. She was really insane, and at least half of the top decks had her in them. You can see why almost everyone wanted legendaries. They were truly legendary with their stats and unique features. As a bit of a side note, Supercell also added a clan chest that was free to open every 2 weeks and almost had a 15% chance for a legendary. There were already many ways to get legendaries, but there was more to come from Supercell's generosity. Speaking of generosity, why doesn't your beautiful self scroll down a couple pixels and click that subscribe button? It's free, after all, and I'm aiming to hit 100k subs by the end of the year. So while you're there, you can also join my membership to get cool perks. Oh, and there's a Discord link in the description. We'll move on. By the end of 2016, there were 10 legendary cards. What about the other cards? Well, not a lot. There were fewer common cards added, while other rarities saw a bit more growth, but people still preferred legendaries over rares and epics. You can see how special these legendary cards were back in 2016. Unlike now, they were truly exceptional, but today they've lost their legendariness and feel like every other normal card. This shift pretty much started in 2016. Oh, I forgot to mention that once you reached the legendary arena, today's Hog Mountain, legendary chests would occasionally appear in the shop for 40,000 gold. According to many players, this made legendary cards feel less special. Their uniqueness and power were reduced to a gold value. Players couldn't even imagine that cards so rare, so special, and infrequent could be given a gold value, but Supercell just did that. Still, 40,000 gold was a ridiculous amount in the game back then. The economy wasn't as great for gold. Today, we have gold crates, clan wars, quests, and more. Back then, it was a different story. In 2017, Supercell made legendaries feel even less special by removing the super magical chest and introducing the legendary King's chest. This new chest cost only 2,500 gems, guaranteed a legendary, and let you choose between 2 legendaries, a feature players loved and still appreciate today. Supercell recognized how expensive and disappointing the super magical chests were, especially for free-to-play players who didn't get a legendary after spending so many gems. Their goal was to make the game fun for everyone, but this also slightly devalued epics and legendary cards. The best deal remained the legendary chest because it was much cheaper, but it wasn't always available. The devaluation didn't stop there. In the same year, Supercell introduced leagues and quests. Quests allowed players to earn points for legendary, legendary king, and super magical chests, reducing the surprise factor. While players enjoyed earning big rewards, legendaries were becoming more like rares and epics. With leagues, players who reached 4,000 trophies could get the draft chest, which guaranteed a legendary if they reached Master 2 League. This made legendaries feel like scheduled rewards rather than rare finds. 2018 wasn't much better for legendaries. Another major update introduced trade tokens, which further devalued them. Initially, players could hold 1 extra legendary after maxing one out, but that was soon removed. As a result, anyone with a maxed out legendary could trade legendaries infinitely. Well, provided they had the trade tokens and 20,000 gold. This made it easy and inexpensive to obtain legendaries. At that time, almost everyone included at least 1 or 2 legendaries in their deck. The most popular was the Log, with a 50% usage rate. The Log was powerful and essential for almost every deck to counter swarms, a trend that continues to this day. Legendaries, along with other card rarities like commons and epics, were starting to lose their distinction in value. More and more players began to feel that card rarities no longer mattered as much. Additionally, balance changes were introduced to address overpowered cards, which contributed to the decline in popularity of some strong and rare cards. In 2019, the introduction of Pass Royale further devalued card rarities. With a $5 seasonal pass, players could unlock a plethora of rewards and new chests with better chances of dropping epics and legendaries. This shift continued with the release of Clan Wars 2 the following year, which introduced even more ways to obtain cards. 2021 was perhaps the most challenging year for card devaluation, especially for legendary cards. Supercell introduced magical items to address the game's economy issues, which they succeeded in doing, but at a cost. While these items made it easier for players to upgrade cards, they also made rare cards easier to max out. The Book of Cards, for example, provided all the cards needed for a level up, allowing players to use the Legendary Book of Cards and the Book of Books to max out their legendaries for around 2,500 gems. Additionally, Royal Wild chests were introduced, surpassing the legendary chest in value and frequency. Supercell also increased the frequency of legendary cards in chests. Compared to 2016, this new system made obtaining legendaries much cheaper and more accessible. Combining magical items with Pass Royale's Diamond Pass today offers a cost-effective way to unlock and upgrade cards of all rarities. Following magical items, Supercell introduced Champions, which seem to repeat the history of adding a new rarity with unique features and stats. Champions, being the highest rarity, are rarer than any other card type, with very low chances of being unlocked from most chests and difficult to upgrade and max out, much like legendary cards from 2016. Then in 2022, card masteries were introduced, and while some players found them worthwhile, the introduction of level 15 in 2023 and the subsequent changes to chests containing much more gold altered the game's dynamics. Now, the primary purpose of gold is to buy offers to get elite wild cards, and you need a lot of gold to acquire enough wild cards to upgrade a single card. Masteries were never adapted to the reduced value of gold, and neither were Clan War rewards. Also, in the middle of 2023, card evolutions were introduced, allowing lower rarity cards to evolve and become more powerful. This development made legendaries and other rarities seem less impactful as they were overshadowed by the new, more powerful troops. The unique status that once set legendary cards apart had long since diminished, and the introduction of evolutions further eroded their former significance. These new evolved cards started circulating within the game's meta at that time, making legendaries less prevalent and shifting the focus towards the evolved, more powerful troops. Every deck after 2023, legendaries were switched with evolved commons in most decks. It's difficult to sum everything up in a few words, but here's the best way to put it. Cards are now very different than they were in the past, especially legendary cards. In the past, card rarities truly meant something. Higher rarity cards were harder to max out, requiring players to play almost every day, often spending money to stay ahead. Legendaries were the pinnacle of this challenge, making them truly deserving of their, legendary status. Rare, hard to get, and difficult to max out. As Supercell aimed to make legendaries more accessible, they lost their special status for OG players. Now, legendaries are cheap, easy to obtain, easy to upgrade, and have lost their surprise factor. The legendary card animation has become almost annoying. Come on, just get on with it already. While I understand Supercell's intentions to make legendaries accessible for everyone, it still feels disappointing. They succeeded in making legendaries available to all, enhancing the fun, but in doing so, they took away the joy and uniqueness that made legendary cards special. However, in 2021, champions were introduced, dethroning legendaries as the rarest cards, just as legendaries did to epics back in 2016. Legendary cards still have their unique features, but champions now boast even more unique attributes that set them apart. It seems like Supercell recognized the diminishing value of legendaries and wanted to recreate that sense of reward and surprise from 2016, resulting in the creation of champions. Rarer, harder to obtain, but very rewarding. As the saying goes, treasure the moment before it becomes a memory. That's why cards today no longer feel special in Clash Royale. Older players, especially, miss the charm of the past when there was no Pass Royale, quests, or magical items, just the grind to max out cards, which felt far more rewarding than it does today. Hey, if you enjoyed this video, dive into the next chapter of Clash Royale's wild history by watching how the Phoenix ruined Clash Royale. Trust me, you won't want to miss this. I'll see you there.